Hi there. I have a friend who very suddenly recently lost his mother, and I'm watching him try to process this. And I'm wondering if you have any words of comfort based on your insights on death and dying.
Thank you. Now, dealing with death and dying, which is of course everywhere around us, although it's to a large extent hidden in our society because society is not yet comfortable with acknowledging the pervasiveness of death and dying, without taking refuge into some kind of belief structure. I'm not saying that every belief structure, that every belief that you may have about death is wrong. But I'd like to approach death without telling you this or that, without even telling you they are waiting for you on the other side, you're going to meet again. I don't want to go there, but to something more. I'm not saying this won't happen, and I'm not saying it will happen, but to leave it at a more vital level that does not require some kind of story making, even if the story is true, some kind of conceptualization in your head. So to be with the fact of death, somebody close to you, or in your case it's indirectly, so your job is to be with someone who has suffered loss. And so you are dealing with it indirectly with this, your friend's grief. And so in your case, of course, I would recommend, rather than tell your friend some story that they're going to survive, or you will meet again, or they have moved, just accept what your friend feels fully, the grief that your friend feels, and your friend's job is to accept the fact of death. Now, if you are able to accept not only the fact of death, which is all around you continuously, but also the fact that whatever you feel at this moment, the sadness or the grief, say yes to both the dead body that you might see and the grief that you feel. Bring an acceptance to that rather than thinking it shouldn't be, it should be otherwise. Many people are shocked when they encounter death in our civilization because nobody has told them, not really, that everybody around them is going to die. They know it as some abstract fact at the back of their heads. They know that, yes, they're going to die, and another abstract fact at the back of your mind is that I'm going to die too, but you don't really believe it until perhaps somebody very close to you dies, and then it begins to dawn on you that I'm going to die too, and then the mind will push that out of the way again. As you may know, in some Buddhist countries, the monks regularly visit the morgue where they keep the dead bodies on display, and they sit there for a few hours at a time and meditate on death. They meditate on the fact of impermanence of the physical form, which the Western world has hardly heard of. Impermanence of the physical form can't be. Death is a travesty, it shouldn't be happening. They contemplate the impermanence, or if you go to India, where soon after death they take the dead body and they burn it, and everybody watches. To a Westerner, that is, oh, this is dreadful. Well, that's what is. That's what happens to the physical form. If one had lived with the as in some ancient, older cultures, they lived in closer proximity to the fact of death and therefore had greater acceptance of the naturalness of death. For us, it's more difficult, but we need to learn that to realize that the physical form is impermanent. And if you can accept a great loss, and death is one of the greatest losses, the death of somebody close to you, if a great loss comes into your life, and if you can be in a state of non-resistance when this dear person that has been in your life for so many years suddenly disappears and leaves behind this emptiness, if you can be in a state of non-resistance to that, and even non-resistance to whatever you feel, if you feel grief, allow yourself to feel the grief. If you can be the awareness or the space for that, then you go beyond unhappiness. You may still feel grief, but you go into a state of deep inner peace, particularly in the face of death. Whenever something great loss comes into your life, it leaves behind a space, an emptiness. Let's imagine, could happen to anybody, maybe this body or that body suddenly goes plop, and suddenly there's an empty chair where before there was a body. This is how it is. If you could see how all-pervasive death is, if you imagine, I like to use the analogy of a soap bubble. If you imagine every body here is a soap bubble, and any of the soap bubbles could go pop at any moment. And you know what happens to a soap bubble when it goes pop? There's nothing left. Just a little drop. That's strange, but a minute ago there was something there, and a minute later there's nothing there. Now if you're totally attached to the form of the soap bubble, then it's dreadful, because that was... But the essence of the soap bubble wasn't the form of the soap bubble, because that was insignificant. The essence of the soap bubble was the space in the soap bubble. And so nothing is really lost. And in fact, I like to use the expression, a hole appears in the fabric of your existence when great loss suddenly happens. So there's a fabric, everything is in place, you have a house, and you have your relationships, and you have your job, and you have this and that. That's all in place, but it won't be in place for long, because sooner or later a little thing is going to and a big hole, I'm now using a different analogy, a big hole happens or a small hole, my investments, small hole, some small loss, somebody close to me dies, huge loss. Some kind of loss. Loss means where there was something, there's now nothing. Where there was somebody, there's now nobody. And that's where the pain comes from, is the emptiness. I experienced it acutely many years ago. I was visiting my mother when my stepfather died, and he was always sitting in the same chair many years. And so I arrived at my mother's place, and I had the strangest experience when I saw the empty chair. He had always been in it, and suddenly he was gone. It was just an empty space. There was nobody sitting in the chair, just an empty space. And that was actually a deep realization of the formless. The formless dimension comes into your life when a form in your life disappears. And if you can be with it, not resist it internally, it becomes transformed into a spiritual deepening, and you get to a very deep place within yourself. And in that very deep place within yourself, that is the formless essence of all life, that's the grace that's hiding behind every loss and every death, that it leaves behind formlessness. The form disappears, and for a moment you're aware of the formless. And that is the spiritual, when you cannot, if you don't resist it, but allow it, the great deepening happens. And suddenly you go so deep that you realize that death is not ultimately real. Without formulating any more theories, it's a deep knowing that the essence of life is formless. The essence of who you are is formless. It was, what was it? Leonard Cohen, singer. There's a song, I believe, that goes, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets through. And of course, there's very deep truth. There's a crack in everything, that really means every situation. Eventually, you'll find the crack in it, where the form begins to collapse. Any structure, any situation, and that's where the light comes through. And that's what you learn that's what the Buddhist monks learn when they go to the morgue. They become at home with that fact. Oh, so there is, even behind, death is not the most dreadful thing. There's actually beauty hiding behind it. So, great opportunity. Wait for the next crack to appear in your life. It may be small, or it may be large. And then see that there's grace hiding there, and the light, which is the formlessness, the formless, shines through. And this is why some people have gone, even people who have had never any spiritual training or any spiritual teaching, may not have read any spiritual book. It has happened occasionally that some people who experience deep loss in their lives became transformed and suddenly became awake through their loss. And this is, I believe, how the first spiritual teachers, thousands of years ago, it happened to them. They must have had deep loss in their life, and through the deep loss and acceptance, because they couldn't resist any longer, it was too painful, they accepted. And suddenly, through the opening, the formless, they lost everything. The light comes through. The formless essence of all life. And you are in touch with that suddenly. You are that. And from there you know that death is not ultimately real, just as the physical form is not ultimately real. It's a little bit, every physical form is a little bit dreamlike, a dreamlike temporary appearance. But there's something there that is real, but that has no form and it cannot really be named. That's why the Buddha calls it emptiness, so that you can't form some image around it. It's of course very clever, because no matter how hard you try, emptiness is the one word that you can't form an image around it or believe in it. Any other word that you use, well, I use sometimes formlessness, that's pretty hard too, but emptiness is even better perhaps. And of course the Western people, Western scholars say Buddhism is life-denying, because they don't understand in what sense, in what deep sense the word emptiness is used in Buddhism. So they say it's life-denying, and then if you ask them, then why is the Buddha smiling? They say, oh, I don't know. if Buddhism is life-denying, what is there to smile about? But the Buddha is quite blissful. But he's denying life. There must be something wrong here. It's not, it's actually supremely life-affirming, but it's not equating life with the forms of life. It's going to the essence of life, the unmanifested, timeless essence that lives through each form, appears as each form, and then disappears again as that form. The one consciousness, the one life. And death is an opportunity to experience that, to be that, to go into that.